The response to Sarah's Facebook post was immediate and overwhelming. Within hours, the neighborhood group was flooded with comments and shares, as the truth about Karen's manipulative scheme began to spread like wildfire. Neighbors who had previously dismissed Sarah's claims now found themselves reconsidering their stance, as the evidence presented in the post became increasingly difficult to ignore. Angry comments and demands for accountability began to pour in, directed squarely at Karen. Realizing that her carefully crafted facade was crumbling, Karen launched into a desperate damage control effort. She tried to counter Sarah's post with her own version of events, but the neighbors were no longer willing to accept her excuses. One by one, the community members came forward, sharing their own experiences with Karen's bullying and entitlement. Stories of past incidents, long-buried grievances, and Karen's history of exploiting her neighbors all came to light, painting a damning portrait of a woman who had terrorized the block for far too long. As the pressure mounted, Karen found herself cornered, her power and influence slipping away. Desperate to regain control, she resorted to increasingly erratic and volatile behavior, lashing out at her neighbors and even threatening legal action. But it was too late. The tide had turned, and the community had rallied behind Sarah, determined to finally stand up to Karen's abuse. In a dramatic showdown, the neighbors confronted Karen, demanding that she make amends and restore the community's internet access. Faced with the overwhelming evidence and the united front of her neighbors, Karen had no choice but to concede defeat. Humiliated and stripped of her status, she was forced to publicly apologize and take responsibility for her actions. In the end, justice prevailed, and Sarah emerged victorious, her reputation restored and her faith in her community renewed. The block had banded together to stand up to a bully, and the lesson was clear. Even the mightiest Karens can be brought down when the people refuse to be silenced. Sarah spent the next few days in a state of near-constant anxiety. Her neighbors were furious, bombarding her with angry calls and texts. Some even threatened legal action, claiming she had violated their privacy by stealing the Wi-Fi password. Desperate to clear her name, Sarah decided to confront Karen directly. She marched over to her neighbor's house, fist raised to knock, when the door suddenly swung open. There stood Karen, a self-satisfied smirk on her face. Well, if it isn't my freeloader neighbor," she drawled. "Come to beg for forgiveness. You know damn well I didn't do this." Sarah shot back. "Why did you have to go and post the password all over the place?" Karen crossed her arms, her expression turning to one of mock concern. "I was just trying to help the community, Sarah. You were hogging all the bandwidth, and I couldn't stand to see our neighbors suffer any longer." "That's a lie, and you know it." Sarah could feel her anger boiling over. "You did this to get back at me, didn't you?" "Maybe." Karen shrugged nonchalantly. "Or maybe I'm just a concerned citizen looking out for the greater good." She leaned in, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Of course, if you were to, say, apologize and promise to stop using my Wi-Fi, I might be willing to make this all go away." Sarah stared at her in disbelief. "You're blackmailing me." "Call it what you will." Karen's smile widened. "But I'd think carefully about your next move, if I were you." Sarah's mind raced as she stared at Karen, her neighbor's words echoing in her head. Blackmail. This was unbelievable. She had to find a way to fight back, to clear her name and expose Karen's underhanded tactics. Turning on her heel, Sarah stormed back to her house, her fingers already flying across her phone's screen. She needed to rally the other neighbors, to show them the truth about what was really going on. Within minutes, Sarah had organized an emergency block meeting. As the neighbors gathered, their faces twisted with anger and frustration, she knew she had to tread carefully. "Look, I know you're all upset about the slow internet," she began, "but I had nothing to do with this. Karen is the one who posted the Wi-Fi password all over the place." The neighbors erupted in outrage, shouting and pointing accusatory fingers at Sarah. "That's not true," one woman yelled. Karen said you were stealing her internet. She's lying to you, Sarah pleaded, her voice rising above the din. Karen is blackmailing me, trying to force me to apologize and stop using the Wi-Fi. The crowd fell silent, their expressions shifting from anger to confusion. Sarah seized the opportunity, quickly explaining Karen's demand and the threats she had made. As the reality of the situation sank in, the neighbors began to murmur and nod. One by one, they turned to face Karen's house, their eyes narrowed with suspicion. If what Sarah's saying is true, a man spoke up, then we've all been played for fools. The crowd erupted in indignant shouts, their voices carrying across the block. Karen, watching from her window, suddenly found herself the target of her own neighbor's wrath. Karen watched in dismay as the angry mob gathered on her front lawn, their shouts and accusations echoing through the quiet neighborhood. She had never anticipated that her plan to get back at Sarah would backfire so spectacularly. Mustering her courage, Karen stepped outside, attempting to placate the crowd. "What's the meaning of this?" she demanded. "Why are you all out here making such a ruckus?" The neighbors turned to face her, their expressions a mix of betrayal and fury. "We know what you did, Karen," one man shouted. "You posted the Wi-Fi password and blamed Sarah, didn't you?" Karen opened her mouth to protest, but the crowd's roar drowned out her words. "You lied to us," a woman cried. "You used us to get back at your neighbor, and now our internet is terrible." Realizing she was cornered, Karen resorted to her usual tactics. "This is outrageous," she huffed. "I was simply trying to help the community. It's not my fault Sarah couldn't control her internet usage." But the neighbors were having none of it. "That's a load of crap, and you know it," another man shouted. "We're not falling for your lies anymore, Karen." Suddenly, a woman stepped forward, her face set in a determined scowl. "I think it's time we all take a stand against your bullying, Karen. This neighborhood has put up with your antics for far too long." The crowd erupted in cheers, and Karen felt a surge of panic. She had always been the queen of her little kingdom, but now her subjects were turning against her. As the neighbors closed in, she knew she had to act fast. Karen's eyes darted around the crowd, her mind racing. She had to find a way to regain control of the situation, to turn the tables on her neighbors and reclaim her rightful place as the undisputed ruler of the block. Straightening her shoulders, she fixed the crowd with her most imperious glare. "How dare you all gang up on me like this?" she thundered. "I am the victim here, not Sarah. She's the one who's been freeloading off my generosity and disrupting our community's internet access." A murmur of confusion rippled through the crowd, and Karen seized the opportunity. "I was simply trying to find a solution to our problem, to ensure that everyone had fair and equal access to the internet. But Sarah, with her constant streaming and gaming, has been hogging all the bandwidth." She paused, letting her words sink in. "So I decided to share the password, to give everyone a chance to use the network. But instead of being grateful, you're all turning on me." The neighbors exchanged uncertain glances, some of them shifting uncomfortably. Karen could see the doubt creeping into their expressions, and she pressed on, her voice dripping with wounded indignation. "I'm the victim here, not Sarah. She's the one who's been taking advantage of my kindness, and now you're all blaming me for trying to fix the situation." Karen shook her head, her eyes brimming with tears. "I'm so disappointed in all of you. I thought we were a community, but I see now that I was mistaken." As the crowd fell silent, Karen knew she had them right where she wanted them. She had spun the narrative in her favor, casting herself as the innocent victim and Sarah as the selfish freeloader. Now, it was time to go in for the kill. Sarah watched in stunned silence as Karen's crocodile tears turned the tide of the crowd. She could hardly believe what was happening. Her neighbor's shameless manipulation was working, and the neighbors were actually starting to doubt her. Desperate to regain control of the situation, Sarah stepped forward, her voice trembling with emotion. "You can't seriously be buying into this," she cried. Karen is lying to all of you. She's the one who posted the Wi-Fi password, not me." But the neighbors were already shifting their attention away from Karen, their expressions a mix of uncertainty and confusion. "I don't know, Sarah," one man said hesitantly. "Karen does have a point about the bandwidth issue. Maybe we should hear her out." Sarah felt her heart sink as the crowd murmured in agreement. She had lost her foothold, and now Karen was firmly in charge. The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. She was on her own, and her neighbors were no longer willing to listen. Turning to face Karen, Sarah could see the triumphant gleam in her neighbor's eyes. "You're despicable, you know that." She spat, her voice laced with bitterness. "I can't believe you're actually getting away with this." Karen's lips curled into a cruel smile. "Oh, Sarah, you have no idea just how far I'm willing to go to protect my interests." She leaned in, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "And if you know what's good for you, you'll keep your mouth shut and accept my generous offer." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. She knew that she was fighting a losing battle, but she refused to back down. Somehow, someway, she would find a way to expose Karen's lies and restore her reputation in the community. In the days that followed, Sarah found herself increasingly isolated and ostracized by her neighbors. Karen had managed to turn the entire block against her, using a combination of crocodile tears, half-truths, and outright lies. Frustrated and feeling powerless, Sarah decided to take matters into her own hands. She knew that she needed to find a way to gather irrefutable evidence against Karen, something that would expose her neighbor's deceitful schemes once and for all. Determined, Sarah began scouring the neighborhood, searching for any clues or witnesses that could help her case. She knocked on doors, pleading with her neighbors to reconsider their stance and listen to her side of the story. But her efforts were met with a wall of indifference and hostility. The neighbors, still under the sway of Karen's manipulation, refused to even entertain the idea that their beloved community leader could be capable of such underhanded tactics. Defeated, Sarah retreated to her home, her mind racing with desperation and a growing sense of anger. She knew that she couldn't give up, not when so much was at stake. But the path forward seemed increasingly unclear, and she found herself wondering if she would ever be able to regain the trust of her community. It was then that a glimmer of hope emerged. As Sarah scrolled through her phone, her eyes landed on a seemingly innocuous neighborhood Facebook group. Suddenly, an idea began to take shape in her mind, a way to reach out to the wider community and expose Karen's lies. Filled with a renewed sense of determination, Sarah set to work, crafting a detailed post that laid out the entire sequence of events. She carefully documented every interaction with Karen, providing evidence and screenshots to back up her claims. With a trembling finger, Sarah hit the post button, sending her message out into the digital ether. Now, all she could do was wait and hope that someone somewhere would be willing to listen. The response to Sarah's Facebook post was immediate and overwhelming. Within hours, the neighborhood group was flooded with comments and shares, as the truth about Karen's manipulative scheme began to spread like wildfire. Neighbors who had previously dismissed Sarah's claims now found themselves reconsidering their stance, as the evidence presented in the post became increasingly difficult to ignore. Angry comments and demands for accountability began to pour in, directed squarely at Karen. Realizing that her carefully crafted facade was crumbling, Karen launched into a desperate damage control effort. She tried to counter Sarah's post with her own version of events, but the neighbors were no longer willing to accept her excuses. One by one, the community members came forward, sharing their own experiences with Karen's bullying and entitlement. Stories of past incidents, long-buried grievances, and Karen's history of exploiting her neighbors all came to light, painting a damning portrait of a woman who had terrorized the block for far too long. As the pressure mounted, Karen found herself cornered, her power and influence slipping away. Desperate to regain control, she resorted to increasingly erratic and volatile behavior, lashing out at her neighbors and even threatening legal action. But it was too late. The tide had turned, and the community had rallied behind Sarah, determined to finally stand up to Karen's abuse. In a dramatic showdown, the neighbors confronted Karen, demanding that she make amends and restore the community's internet access. Faced with the overwhelming evidence and the united front of her neighbors, Karen had no choice but to concede defeat. Humiliated and stripped of her status, she was forced to publicly apologize and take responsibility for her actions. In the end, justice prevailed, and Sarah emerged victorious, her reputation restored and her faith in her community renewed. The block had banded together to stand up to a bully, and the lesson was clear. Even the mightiest Karens can be brought down when the people refuse to be silenced.